Deshaun Watson and Dalvin Cook were definitely considered Heisman Trophy candidates before the start of the season, but there's a new guy on the scene, and he is all over the scene of college football right now based on his first 3-week performances. We bring in Brittnee Taylor Newman from inside the ACC to help us sort out some Heisman candidates as they apply to the ACC. Brittnee, thanks for jumping on board here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mark.
Yes, it's good to see you. So we've got, of course, Deshaun Watson, who everyone expected to be in this race, front and center, coming off last season's trip to the Heisman Trophy presentation and 500-yard performance against Alabama in the national championship game. Your thoughts about Deshaun's performance thus far?
Well, I think he's kind of stuttered and stopped and started here. Clemson hasn't gotten off to quite as strong of a start as Clemson fans, and I think most of the nation hoped and thought that they would. I think for right now, to stay in the Heisman conversation, he certainly is still a contender. The very first thing that Deshaun Watson has to do is win, starting tonight against Georgia Tech. They've lost the last 5 in Atlanta to Georgia Tech. They haven't won there since 2003. So if they can win tonight, a feat that most would assume would be definitely possible, although recent stats have not been in their favor. But if they can win tonight, that's a good starting point for certain. I think the other thing that is in his favor at the moment is some of the off-the-field behavior that we've seen from him. He's kind of taken a leadership role that's more in the spotlight after they struggled against Troy. He apologized to the media and to teammates and sent out a rallying text to everyone on the offense, taking the blame for the slow start against Troy and kind of shouldering that burden, even though Dabo Swinney had pointed out already in press conferences he didn't think his quarterback was to blame for the start against Troy. But voters and fans alike love to see these kinds of leadership heroics. We like the storylines along with the numbers. So that definitely is in Deshaun Watson's favor. The two things I think that are really key for him are actually out of his control. First is whether or not his offensive line will be able to step up to the plate and consistently block for him. There's been some inconsistencies there in quarterback protection at Clemson. And the other thing, and we saw this last week, so many of the passes that he threw were dropped by the receivers. If he can get the receivers to get in sync with his passes and is able to rack up those numbers, then he's back in, that square one starting point where he's going to be able to compete with some of the other names in the ACC for the Heisman. Definitely still a contender, but Clemson will have to step up their game a little bit if Deshaun Watson is going to be in the running at the end of the season.
Yeah, chemistry and rapport and being in sync speaks to a lot of success in offensive football, and we just assume based on his season, the talent around him, most of the talent coming back from the 2015 squad, that it just automatically falls into place. They have the rough game against Troy, the opener at Auburn against a very good Auburn defense, but still Clemson didn't show in that game much explosive firepower in scoring just 19 points. So Deshaun Watson, the name's big, the stage is big. He has the opportunity there, but he hasn't played like a Heisman Trophy candidate thus far. Dalvin Cook, very similar, statistically ran into a very tough Louisville defense, and it's been a bit of a rough ride for Dalvin thus far.
Yes, at this point right now, 3 games in, Dalvin Cook is actually 248 yards behind where he was at this point last season. Of course, his performance last week against Louisville didn't help that case at all. He had just 54 rushing yards last week against Louisville. Interestingly enough, in week 3 of 2015, he also had just 54 rushing yards against a team that was being carried by a very stingy defense, although a weak offense, Boston College. His strongest showing last year at this point in the season, for another parallel here, was 266 rushing yards against the team that he will see this Saturday, USF. So if Dalvin is able to step back into that role and rack up some of those yards again this weekend, he may be well on his way to meeting that school record that he set last year for 1,691 rushing yards. But what I'm curious to see with Dalvin Cook is whether or not he's hiding a little bit of the injury to that shoulder. We've seen some scenes in Showtime's show this year, a season with, they're covering Florida State, and there's been some behind-the-scenes shots that are making people think that perhaps Dalvin is a little bit more injured than he's letting on. But if he can get as many yards this weekend as he did in this game against USF last year, then that will kind of help to make up the deficit of the 248 yards that he is behind so far this season.
Yeah, I remember catching that game against South Florida last year, and despite the apparent discrepancy in talent by the two squads, South Florida hung in that game most of the game, and if Cook up the 2 very special runs in that game that only a handful of backs, if that many, could make across America, Florida State probably gets upset against the Bulls. And now we arrived at the guy that's really burst onto the scene. We saw him in part-time duty as the starting quarterback at Louisville early last season. Then he took over the job and basically was kind of this playmaker who was fun to watch, but did he really know what he was doing most of the season? But he got better and better. And now he's really taken off and had that statement game that everybody's looking for out of a Heisman candidate last week at home against Florida State. And that's, of course, Lamar Jackson.
Yes, everybody's talking about Lamar Jackson. He's so much fun to watch play. And it's no wonder. I mean, he's elusive as any great, absolutely fantastic running back in the game. But he's got a completion percentage of his passes of 61%. At this point right now, he's got 304 passing yards, 154 rushing yards for the season, and 18 touchdowns, which is absolutely astounding for a quarterback. So the thing that Lamar Jackson has to do if he wants to stay at the top of the Heisman conversation at this point is to keep doing what he's doing. They've just got to keep winning. Of course, they're playing Marshall this weekend, so he'll have an opportunity to pad his stats even further. And as long as Louisville is able to stay consistent throughout the rest of the season, Lamar is able to keep from getting injured. Of course, that's always the curse that can beleaguer some of these Heisman hopefuls. If they're able to keep winning and he's able to stay on the field, it's hard to see at this point what might stop Lamar Jackson from being one of the finals there at the ceremony in New York in December.
So, Brittnee, as you know, it was assumed by many that Florida State-Clemson, that game would decide the ACC. The other division winner was a de facto. It didn't matter. That was the championship game. And now Louisville's kind of broken up the party. And so Lamar Jackson has obviously made his bid against Florida State. And I saw some numbers the other day that he was 100-1 odds to win the Heisman Trophy before the season started. He's now a 6-5 favorite to win the Heisman. So he's got the one monumental game that everybody points to against Clemson now, not just for Heisman candidacy, but for the division race. And now they're the second to last one to look out if the Cougars remain undefeated as expected. Going to throw a couple dark horse candidates at you, especially if one of these guys elevates their program to the ACC championship game and knocks off one of the big boys from the trifecta of Louisville, Florida State, and Clemson, and that would be Mitch Trubisky, the starting quarterback at North Carolina. Hasn't really played anyone to date. They had a big win against Illinois in terms of the point spread of the game, but Illinois, one of the lesser teams in the Big Ten. Trubisky's at 74% passing, has yet to throw an interception in 3 games, 5 touchdown passes. Brad Kaya, our friend Cam Underwood from State of the U on SB Nation, his favorite player. Brad Kaya, the quarterback at Miami, junior season, has gotten off to a bit of a rough start, but his team is 3-0. And, of course, they've got the marquee games against North Carolina and Florida State upcoming. And James Conner, don't believe that he's going to make a bid for the Heisman, but a sentimental favorite here. Of course, battling back from cancer. It's just amazing that he's on a football field, scored a couple touchdowns a week ago. That he's been able to battle back and get himself into playing shape and make a strong contribution. And he was ACC Player of the Year just 2 seasons ago with 26 touchdowns. It should be very interesting. There's always the guys that are front and center that we expect to be in the limelight, and then here comes Lamar Jackson out of nowhere to a certain extent. And could make this run all the way to New York City, Brittnee.
Yeah, well, it'll certainly be fun to watch. If there's anything that we've learned so far, it's that he can leap over anyone and anything in his path all the way to the Heisman ceremony. So I'll be watching. I'm sure you will be too.
All right, Brittnee Taylor Newman from Inside the ACC helping us break down the Heisman race to date with the 3 main candidates right there in the ACC. Thank you so much, Brittnee.
Thanks for having me on.